Hello ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring you something different. In that case, I would like to bring you the base. So I know you were waiting for that, but before to use the airbrush, I'm going to explain you how to use the airbrush in that base. So if you see the base, you will see that I assembled or put it together everything, all the materials, and then I prime it with black and white. So then I'm going to use my airbrush to paint the base coats. So I know I'm going to break my own rules about capibases, but in that case I'm going to use capibases in my airbrush over the base. So I don't want to use glazing with my airbrush. I have to add a lot of painting as I'm adding with my brush. So, but remember, you have to have a thin dilution, because if you add a lot of paint and then your airbrush can't spray, you have to clean it, you have to clean your airbrush again, so you will lose a lot of time. So how you have to work, you can see my finger, you can see how I work. It's just spray one time, then blow air, then spray again, then blow air. Exactly the same technique I explained you when you are painting your glazing with your airbrush, but in that case with more painting. So if you cover with 2 or 3, maybe 4 layers, will be okay. If you need to cover with 17 layers, you are painting with water, with dirty water. So please add more painting in your cap and then paint with less layers. So why I've decided to start with something like this, with greens? This is because if you were watching the whole video tutorial, you will understand that I said I would like to put inside in a jungle or in a forest. In that case I was thinking in a jungle. So think that I would like to play with greens and browns like in a jungle. But if you think just the ground is brown and the trees, the brushes, the bosses are greens, you don't have a lot of space to paint all the details. So for that reason, I try to use as a main color, the principal color, this green. But I would like to paint with different greens. So at the beginning I was playing with a green with a lot of yellow, so a warm color. And now I'm going to use a cold color. I'm going to use a green with a lot of blue inside. And I'm going to use this green, not a dark green. So this kind of green, a saturated green with a lot of blue around the base and under some stones or under the base. So like under the tree or in some rocks where I thought that maybe like a dropped shadow should have, and maybe it's a nice place to add this kind of green too. So as you can see, I was painting again with enough layers to remove completely the white color. So please don't keep the primer in a place, because then you will continue keeping that color in the whole process, and you will like to, or you will think to repaint or try to use the airbrush again, and maybe you will lose some nuances that you have painted at the end. So remember, with these 2 or 3 layers with different colors that I'm going to show you, try to paint full like a copy base. Remember that I would like to use capibases with my airbrush, so I have to paint everything, and then it's the moment to start with nuances, with different colors, more stuff. But now with these 2 layers, try to paint everything. Remember, if you want to play with different colors, like for example a brown, maybe you have to keep this white in the places where you should add this brown. But if you want to use different greens, for sure you can blend, you can prime everything with this new color. For example, now I'm painting with a different green. In that case, I am painting with a green plus magenta, so a desaturated green. So now we have 3 kinds of greens in the same base. So this is the key. We have to play on that basis like an abstract canvas. So you have to understand that how much layers and colors you add to the canvas, much more interesting will be. So if you want to play with green, if you play with more different greens, will be more interesting than if you only play with one green. So I'm painting now with a green with a lot of yellow, green with a lot of blue, and now green with a bit of magenta. If you can find the magenta, think about an orange, okay? So it's a green with a bit of orange, and will be, I think, easier to you to understand that kind of color inside of the green. But because we want something else, I'm going to use that color plus a bit of brown with more orange or magenta, and I'm going to paint in the places where I want to add the ground, the earth. But if you see, I'm painting with browns with a lot of green inside. So I don't want to think that, hey, I should pick that kind of brown and paint it to try. No. I would like to test with this kind of brown with a lot of green that I have inside of my cup, and then decide if I have to add more orange or magenta or more green like I have it now. This is just to test, because I understand that in a jungle you have to have a lot of greens and a lot of browns. But in my case, because I don't have enough room to add all the information, I have to decide. So my main color will be green. Be careful with that, because maybe if you have exactly the same green as the skins on your goblins in the same part, maybe it could be blurry or confused the background with the goblins. So this is how I like to work when I'm painting bases, like an abstract canvas. So with wet blending with your brushes, with your airbrush as test at the beginning, to test if I like this kind of browns, this kind of greens, etc. And then use my brush to continue working on that. So the base, to me, it's like the complementary accessory for my models. So I have to keep there all the scene, all the display, all the model. So to me, the main part of this diorama are my models, not the base. If you like more paint the bases, like a landscape in a painting, I recommend you just make them and paint them, just that, and try to represent really awesome landscapes on a model, like a 3D landscape. It's really awesome too, but don't feel uncomfortable if you don't want to paint the model. So if you want to paint the models, you have to think that the base is complementary for the model. Don't represent the main part, the base, and as a complementary, the models. Because if this is your idea, I recommend you don't use them or use tiny animals on your display. Because I've seen bases like a mushroom, huge mushroom with a lot of stuff, and a tiny model lost inside of this mushroom with a lot of vegetables. So think what is much more interesting for you, the main part, if it's the base or the model. If it's the model, I recommend you play like that. So abstract, testing, adding some colors with more yellow, with more orange, with more blue. If you want to use just pure blue, test it. So remember, I'm trying to translate this positivism because you have to enjoy, you have to have fun when you are painting your models. So if for you, this kind of green, it's too low, you want more blue, just add more blue in the mix, will be awesome. So if you want to use pure blue, do it, but just be careful. Think about that. If you want to use it as a glaze, if you want to use as the deepest shadow, so think about what do you want to represent, because my idea with this kind of bases, it's try to find the main part, the main view in some places, and then the 360 degrees around the model. So I don't want to use like a background and block that view. So I would like to show you the whole model. The whole model is really interesting. So to watch it. So try to find some places where you want to add more light to get as a main view. I recommend you always find two. The front view, choose a front view, and the back. these two, like two different lights if you want it, and then complementary lights or midtones around the model to represent this 360. So this is the dilution that I can show you for this, and now it's the moment to add more brown. Why? Because I thought that I need something else. Just that. So I was testing at the beginning with this kind of green with a bit of orange, more orange inside, to represent this kind of earth, okay? It's like a green, super desaturated. But in that case, I would like to use this kind of earth with more magenta, but trying to find the angle to paint just the shadows. As you can see, this will be a perfect test to know if I will play at the end with more magentas, more orange, or I'm going to back to use more greens. So if I want to use more definition on my base, I need to play with more contrast. But this contrast could be going to greens, going to browns with more reds or magenta, or I'm going to decide with this test if I'm going to use my brush to reinforce the shadows, or I'm going to use my brush to reinforce the light, because maybe I was playing with this kind of red in the shadows, and then I'm going to use more green maybe on the lights. So this is to test. So this is what I'm trying to translate to you, because it's something different, more interesting, more abstract. So if you think that the technical part is the most important, you are wrong. Once time you understand the technical part, you will discover my own world. You will discover everything. So now, if the most important part for you is the skill about the technical part, it's because you feel uncomfortable with your brush. Once time you feel comfortable with your brush and your airbrush, you will discover that you have a new completely world to paint. So this is something that I'm trying to translate to you, because once time you understand that just the technical part, it's just one point on your model, you will have another 9 different points on your model, like the colors, like the light, like the ambient, what do you want to translate or represent on your display. So you will find a lot of new ideas that I would like to show you. So here is everything with my brush, airbrush, and now is the time to use the brush. So where you have to paint? First, I recommend you use this kind of brushes that you don't like it. This old brush, maybe it's my famous brush, the winner of 4 crystal brushes. This synthetic and old brush that I use to make my mixes inside of the cap of my airbrush. So I recommend you use this kind of brushes, synthetic or whatever. So old brush, just to test. And I recommend you play like that with more dilution, like 50-50. Recommend you this kind of dilution. So to cover with 2 layers, 100%, or maybe 3 layers, no more, okay? And test on the crest or the tip of every grass, or the stones or earth, some places, wherever you want, just test. Try to test with this kind of green with more orange, green with more yellow, green with more blue, or with more magenta. So more or less with this idea, you can define all these kind of greens, and I think it's enough to start to test if you like them. If you don't like them, this is just my idea. So if you don't like them, you have the possibility to use different colors. If for you, paint everything like I painted, like stones with green. Are you crazy, Sergio? So if you don't want to use greens to paint the stones, you don't have to use it. So you have grays or you have another colors. But I would like to bring you now this way to paint, because I have more ideas to propose you on the video tutorial. So for that reason, I prefer start with the main color. Which one is? Green. So what kind of greens we have? A lot of them. we have to play with them. So then if something you don't like it, we can change it. Will be easier than if you start with, okay, this stone is gray, this rock is gray, this tree is brown, and then where is the ambient? So you have to represent the ambient. This is the most important. It's something that I tried to translate to you in the whole video tutorial. I tried to show you that the ambient, it's really important. It's the most important, maybe because you have to paint the non-metallic metal with the color from the ambient. Maybe you have to choose the color of the skin from the goblins from the ambient, because maybe in another ambient, in a cold ambient, or in the night, the colors will change completely. So the ambient is the most important part. So for that reason, the ambient in our model, in our display, in that case, will be green. For that reason, paint with different greens. You don't have to use just one green. Remember, like an abstract canvas, play with different greens. It's much more interesting play with 17 kind of greens than just with a base coat with only one green. Because maybe you have painted the best base coat, but it's just a base coat. However, if you paint with 17 base coats with different greens, we'll have a lot of nuances, midtones, we'll have soul. What do you want to represent with your base? For example, I want to represent like moose on that tree. So I was testing with my brush, with my old brush, just like a stippling, like a thick stippling, and I will check if the light is correct, if I like it, if I need to add more. This is why I said that you have to use an old brush, because if you use a new brush, you will be worried about, hey, I don't want to lose the peak of my brush. This is perfect, so I don't want to use it for that. Remember, you have the newest brushes to paint the final details, like eyes, like jewelry, like everything tiny, but in the final steps, like when you have to paint the edging. But before, I recommend you use a brush that you can use it for sure. Don't try to use brushes like this to paint the face, because maybe it will be wrong. But to paint the base like this, to test, for example, can you see I'm adding a lot of green, different green on the stones, and maybe in your mind is like, no, you have to use grays. Okay, maybe at the end I'm going to use grays, but let me test if I like it. As you can see on this tutorial about the base, I was playing with different greens, right? But I was playing with different dilutions and different textures. Looks like I'm painting with the same stippling, but the truth is, okay, maybe in some parts I was stippling with more pressure and some of them with a low pressure, just to use the peak of every hair in some tiny places to represent different finishes. For example, like you can see now, I'm painting just with the peak of the hair to represent tiny effect with this mousse. And for example, can you see this kind of line or scratch that I painted? This was to test if I have to paint something like that, could be okay or not. So then I've discovered that it's really interesting, represent this like humidity going down through the tree, and I was testing with that, and the result was nice. So this is what you have to do when you are painting your bases. Remember, the bases, you don't have to paint with the perfect definition. Could be like on photography, the bokeh effect with the background unfocused and the people or the item that you take the photo completely focused. So with this background unfocused, this is what you can do with your base. You don't have to use the perfect definition. I don't use the perfect definition. I'm trying to test this kind of texture is okay here. I like this color. I like this effect, this light. I don't try to represent every texture of the stone, as you can see. I'm trying to paint with low brush strokes. This is what you can see when you forget completely the technical part. So when you lose the chains about the technical part, you will discover a new world. My world! So as you see, I'm painting with texture. I'm trying to represent something to test. If you like it, perfect. If you don't like it, boom, don't do it. You can paint with wet blending, with more humidity, with glazing, with capibases. Everything will be welcome on your base coats, on your bases. For example, I was painting now with this. It's like a water painting, like a dirty water. Just to blend and to test if the light is okay or not. Maybe at the beginning I thought the light was okay, and maybe then it's like, hey, I need to add more light. So this is what I do. And again, I continue adding more light there because this part and the tree are maybe the top or the highest part on my base, and maybe are the places where I want to focus the light to represent the whole display. And if I continue adding more layers with light, with highlights there, I'm going to represent the rest of the colors as a mid-tones. So this is something to keep in your mind, because if you continue painting in tiny places with more layers going up, then the rest of that will look as a mid-tones. You will have a lot of different tonalities. And for example, here on the earth, I was playing with this like a wet blending. Okay, I was adding this kind of ochre with more yellow and with more orange to test if I liked more orange, more green, more red. So this is to test. If you see, I'm trying to paint with brush strokes, loose brush strokes, everything. So, and this is how I work on a base. So I hope you have enjoyed watching this video tutorial, because I have something prepared for you in the next one. So here is the base, and I hope you have enjoyed. See you in the next video tutorial. Bye bye.